Welcome to today's Stat Plus video chat about what we know about Gilead's remdesivir data. Thanks for joining us.
Hi,
I'm Matt
everyone.
Ripper. I'm joined by Adam Forresting. A few quick housekeeping items before we kick off today's chat. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a few icons. Use the chat feature to send a message directly to the stat team should you have any technical difficulties, or to chat amongst yourselves. We will not be taking questions from the chat feature. If you have a question you'd like to ask me or Adam, which we hope you do, there are two options. First, you can use the Q&A feature to type your question in, and we will read it live. Later on, we're going to, right at the beginning, we're going to also use the raise hand button, which you can use to ask a question. Should Adam or I choose to call on you, we'll unmute your microphone so you can ask your question live. Please make sure you've unmuted your microphone before you ask your question. We'll remute your microphone and answer your question on the spot. For people who were answering questions live, we prefer to know who you are. So it's better if you're using your real name. If you didn't use your real name, send it to us in your Q&A with whatever username or you're using. That's just kind of for obvious reasons. So thank you all for being here. Let's get started. And I see we have data. We have an anonymous question already in the Q&A, which is actually an interesting one we'll want to get to. Adam, were there any questions existing that you wanted to take first here?
Do you want to, I mean, we set the table a little bit, Matt, and sort of why we're doing this call. And obviously,
Yeah.
people know we wrote this story last night that generated a lot of attention, clearly. And we wanted to just kind of talk about that and what it means, the implications for it, and answer any questions that people had. So I encourage people to, again, to raise your hand or submit questions in the Q&A. I don't know, do you think we need to summarize it, or do we need to just go into questions? We can go into answer questions.
I think we should go into questions. And I think I don't really have an answer for this one. I don't think you do either. But since anonymous attendee here sent us the first question, yeah. I don't see any raised hands yet right now. So folks, go ahead and raise your hand. We'd love to actually talk to you.
Well, right. So let's start with this question. The question is.
Let's start with this one, which is, will the UFC data?
Right. So the question is, will the University of Chicago data be considered compromised and left out of the data set? And then parenthetically says, which would be a shame. Matt, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think it would be a shame. It is an open label trial.
Yep.
So we're not in the situation of the trial having been functionally unblinded. And
we talked about that, and
we don't know.
That's a good point, Matt. And we should emphasize that here at the top, that this is an open label study, and what open label study means is that everybody knows who's getting what treatment. And in this study, the severe COVID-19 study that we reported on last night, all the patients in the study are getting remdesivir. So there's no unblinding of the study, either during the study or by our reporting on the study. Everyone at all times, including Gilead for that matter, and we can talk about that a little bit later and what the implications of that are, but everybody knows what everyone is getting in the study and how those patients are doing. It is an open label study. So I think that's an important point to make.
And I also think a lot of the questions we've been getting, I think through obviously our DMs and our texts and our phones have been lighting up since this story came out.
Yeah.
And one question we're getting a lot is basically, why did you publish this? With the argument that we are people who frequently write when partial trial data comes out that one should not be too serious about it. And one thing that I think is really important, that I think we were clear about in the article, but I want to underline, is this was a fairly public presentation of data that was sent to us and we were able to access. So I do think it was analogous to someone having presented this information at at a meeting. And one other really interesting question, Adam, which I know we've gotten and we've talked about, is someone asked, well, was this a data presentation or was it a description of clinical characteristics of patients? And I don't know if you have, well, I know you have thoughts on where on the line.
Yeah, and we have gotten a lot of questions about what this actual meeting or this video that we obtained, what it was, and so let's talk about that. This was a meeting held at the University of Chicago amongst a group of clinicians, physicians, faculty members at the University of Chicago Medicine at their hospital, discussing a broad topic all related to the coronavirus and COVID-19. This was like, think of it like I don't know, Matt, a staff meeting might be like, basically that it was going to update people across the spectrum of clinicians there about all the activities that were going on at the hospital at that time related to the coronavirus. So this was, it was like an hour-long meeting, roughly an hour-long meeting, where there were lots of discussion topics. One of those discussion topics during the meeting was the remdesivir clinical trial, of which the University of Chicago was a participant. And that is the principal investigator spoke during this meeting, and she spoke about their experience treating COVID-19 patients with remdesivir, and that's what we reported on. And then this meeting was, because everybody is quarantined or at home, this was a recorded call where people were in different places, and there was a recording of that call, and we obtained a copy, able to access the recording of that meeting, and that's what we reported on.
And it was called something I do. It was called an all hands, right?
Yeah,
like, so
and it was.
You don't know exactly what that means, but it doesn't indicate private conversation for surreptitiously recorded.
Right, and it was a meeting of a group of people, but then it was more widely distributed. So the recording itself was more widely distributed within the University of Chicago itself, and so that, again, this was not surreptitiously recorded, secretly recorded. They recorded it to themselves. They were doing it on purpose so that other people could see what they were talking about.
We have some raised hands, and I want to try them, but they do not. They do not have their usernames. Are not names that I know. But I love this feature. But we're going to ask you guys who you are before you start talking. So if you're not okay with that, unraise your hand. CT Office 2. Yep. Okay. Nicholas. Chris Brown. Okay. Let's use Chris Brown. His name. Hi, Chris. You're on.
Hi. Good morning. I first time caller, long time listener and reader of your site. Are the results, the preliminary results, appreciably better, and they appear to be to me, but I'm not a clinician, than anything going on with hydroxychloroquine? Like the numbers I saw in the article yesterday were sort of a balm for my soul in terms of what I see as some real good news versus hope. It
is so hard to say. I mean, the results on hydroxychloroquine, which I've written about a lot, can go all the way from the Raoult papers, which have people this amazing viral clearance, to completely null randomized studies that are very small. So part of the problem of what compared to what is it's really hard to say for sure what the results of these studies are. And I think, we felt that our job was to convey what this new information was. I think integrating that into a picture of what's going to happen next. This is drug development. It's really hard and things fail all the time. And my main source of optimism personally is that there are so many things that seem like they have a shot that we're going to find out about over the next few months.
Thank you.
Why don't we take a question in Q&A, because I think this is a good question. Jordan Hinahara asks, and I apologize if I'm butchering your name. The question is, can you talk a little bit about the difference in how the general public may be thinking about quote unquote severe COVID-19 versus what the definition was for the purposes of enrollment in this Gilead remdesivir trial? And that's a very good question, and it is a good point to make. You want to start, Matt?
I was looking for the question and lost
Oh.
it. So, this is Jordan's question.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Oh, great.
A very good question.
Very good question, and a thing we're all struggling with. So the Gilead trial had severe means these are obviously hospitalized patients we're talking about. They're people who need oxygen. The enrollment criteria of the severe trial initially said that patients who were on ventilators at the time they were screened could not be admitted. That doesn't mean that they can't be on ventilators in the trial. But they're a milder group than if you just went to the ICU. It's one of the big difficulties of all these COVID-19 trials is going to be, this is a disease, as we all know, that goes all the way from people being asymptomatic to people dying pretty terribly. And for the people who have symptoms, it's really hard. And figuring out how to select patients so you know how sick they are is a problem for all these studies. It's very easy to select a group that's going to do well, or it's very easy to get a group that does well or does worse because of their disease, not because of.
Right. And I would say to Jordan's question, we are not characterizing these patients as severe COVID-19 patients. That is the definition that's the eligibility criteria and the definition that's applied by Gilead as an entry criteria into the study. And so generally, oftentimes I think when people hear severe, they do think of patients who are intubated on mechanical ventilation. And to be clear, in this study, there is an exclusion. If you are already on mechanical ventilation, if you're being intubated, then you are excluded from the study that we wrote about. So it's a little bit less severe than the most severe you could be. Now they have added an additional arm into this study where they are treating patients who are intubated, but I believe for the most part what we are reporting on is not those patients. So these are characterized severe, but they're not intubated. So that's an important nuance and difference that needs to be clear.
Okay, I think we should take Thomas Malley's raised hand.
Okay.
Hey, Thomas.
Hi, Thomas.
Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah, so my question is, when you look at what was reported, they said 2 patients out of 113 severe and 125 total died, about a 2% rate. Nationally, we see that of all the COVID patients that are diagnosed, around 15 to 20% would go to the hospital based on the city, based on Johns Hopkins. And we see nationally that about 4% die. I don't know how many die in the hospital or at home, but that would imply that, say, as many as 20 to 25% of hospitalized patients die. To me, that would imply this data is really good, but maybe I'm missing something. 2% versus a 20% death rate nationally of hospitalized patients. What do you think about that?
I mean, I have the qualm that it's what I said before, that I think the data sound encouraging. I thought that was a good characterization of them, but there's a lot of variability in how patients do and how we hear patients do based on geography. And in trials, you do see, looking at clinical trials, where you have one site that performs much differently than another. Sometimes even one country performs differently than another. So there is a need to see full data.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think it's hard to, from this snapshot, and that's what this is, right? And I think that's actually how we characterized it in the story, that this is a snapshot of a larger clinical trial. So it's hard to just take that and say, oh, it's a 2% mortality rate here and compare it to other data sets. I think it's difficult to do that. I think one of the reasons why we wrote the story was because we did have, this was a decent sample size, 100 plus patients being characterized by the clinician who was in charge of those patients at University of Chicago Hospital. And, that was what was described in the story and quoted in the story is, that there were these patients who were recovering relatively quickly. They were, they were on drug for shorter than the doctors maybe thought they would be. And that, there was this sort of rapid recovery. And that's how the data were described in this meeting, which is what we reported on. But of course, we need to see the overall data set. Hopefully by the end of the month, that's when we will see it. And we'll know, how, whether these kind of results have been replicated in other sites.
I had a comment here from Michael Katz that I would like to read to us. I really enjoy your work reporting, but I could not disagree with your statements about the type of meeting. Physicians frequently discuss research in progress and outcomes at an institutional level with the expressed understanding that this is non-discoverable and pre-publication. The publication of these data will have a worldwide chilling effect on doctor communication, particularly in the era of video teleconferencing, which can be easily recorded. Look, this is an issue for us too. If a reporter tells you that something is off the record, that's actually a very binding promise. And if you ask us to agree, I've been at medical meetings where I've agreed that I would be there, but that I would not write directly off of the meeting as a condition of being there and you learn stuff. This situation where there's what looks like a widely distributed meeting, and there aren't any, it's a very difficult thing, I think, for us to, our job generally without those promises, you shouldn't tell reporter secrets that you don't want us to print. So, we do have a role here as a job and a role in society. And, our job is to surface information. So there may be a conflict here that's changing in society that we need to figure out what to do, but that's why we did it.
Let me take the question, Matt. Let's take a question from Ethan. It was submitted. It's a good one too. Any reason why this trial is open label, and then any reason why Gilead would increase the sample size now up to 6,000? So let's take the first one there. Why this trial is open label. Any thoughts there, Matt?
Well, I think these trials are open label partly so that they'll be easier to do. There is the randomized NIH trial is now becoming the one that people are starting to talk about as the one they're looking to. I think once you have an open label, the question about enrollment, and I don't know, this is speculation on my part, but Gilead's basically said that they have an expanded access program for patients who can't get into trials. So it could be, as some people are saying, that they're expanding the trial because they think the effect is small and they just want more patients. It could also be that they're going to be putting these patients on drug one way or the other, and they'd rather have them
right.
up and get the data.
Yeah, and just to back up, so as Ethan noted, the trial, this severe COVID-19 trial that we reported on last night, that we are discussing here, when we reported on this last night, Matt, the enrollment was roughly 4,000. I think it was 4,200 patients. This morning, Gilead increased that enrollment to 6,000. And that's disclosed on clinicaltrials.gov. If you look there just today, they increased the enrollment on the severe study to 6,000 patients. It's an open label study. There are other studies. Let's just go over the three studies that we're mostly focused on, Matt. So we're talking about this severe study. And that is the two arms, both patients in both arms are getting remdesivir. So there's no control arm. They're doing a moderate COVID-19 study as well. That's also open label. I think there is a control arm in that study. So patients are randomized to remdesivir or a standard of care in the moderate study, although it's not a blinded study. So that randomization is not blinded. And then there's a study that you referred to, Matt, which I agree with you is probably the most important study because it's the most rigorously conducted study ongoing, which is the NIH study which is blinded. It's placebo-controlled and it's blinded. So probably the best data will come from the NIH study.
And I want to follow that up with a question that it's actually two questions from Daryl Francis, I got a question from Daryl Francis. Assuming this is Daryl Francis, the cardiologist, I need to answer it. And he says, when you say the result, when it is out in a few weeks, will give us the full picture. What do you mean? Will it tell you anything about whether the drug works? Will this one-arm trial give us any information on whether the drug is effective? Look, I very much, I did a lot of my work has been covering cardiology, and I wish all clinical trials looked like cardiology trials where they're randomized and they're blinded and the standards for conducting them are very high. I don't know that I would be ready to say that that this trial couldn't tell us anything. Obviously, with this smaller single-arm trial, the effects have to be a lot bigger for you to pick them up, and they're not good for picking up a lot of the things you care about, like mortality. So I wish that they were different, but I'm also not ready to say that those data are necessarily useless, especially in the current situation.
All right, we're going to go to Amy B. We're going to, Amy B, there you go.
Hey,
Amy B, how are you?
Hey guys, thank you. So, hospitals have continued to request compassionate use, expanded use for remdesivir. Have you guys had a look at any of that data?
What was published in New England Journal, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was some data published in the NEJM, New England Journal of Medicine, over the weekend that had been, written about, talked about, discussed, debated whether it was good or bad. That's been out there. Yeah.
And what conclusions do you draw from the severe patient set?
I mean, I think that's similar to this in a way. It's encouraging, but it's hard to draw a conclusion just from those data. That you can certainly look at it and say it looks better than reports from New York. But you have the question of how are doctors selecting those patients? Are there patients that are too sick to ask for compassionate use, which would make the results look better?
Yeah.
Or do they ask if they're really sick? Does that encourage them? Without knowing those kind of questions, it's just very, very hard. There's a problem for us covering this that there's things can be worth adding to the conversation without being definitive.
Okay. Thank you.
Matt, let's take this question, and I'll pose it to you because it's something that we've also been hearing a lot from people. Why did you report on these data before they were released formally by the study investigators? So basically, why did we do what we did?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that same answer of we had this very detailed information, and I think it's our job to surface that information, and we thought about these issues, but
I think people should understand that we didn't go into this willy-nilly. We discussed it internally. Matt and I we discussed it with our editors. We talked about how we were going to do this story, and if we were going to report the story, how we were going to do it, and who we were going to talk to. So just be clear, we reached out to speak to the University of Chicago during our reporting yesterday to get confirmation of what we had obtained from this video was indeed correct and accurate, and we did get that confirmation from the principal investigator who made the comments. I spoke to the woman who was in the video, and she did confirm to me that those were her words. This is what was going on. Matt, you reached out to Gilead and gave Gilead the information that we had.
There was Gilead should not have been surprised by what was in the story. We told them, at least as many as what we had early. Obviously, we weren't done writing when we asked for comment, but things like the numbers and where we were getting it and the situation that this was that this was a presentation that had been made in this kind of a call were conveyed as best we could. So.
And the other thing I think is that what we tried to do, Matt, and I think you'll agree with me because we did talk about this a lot, is that we tried to place this snapshot of the clinical trial in the context of the fact that it is a snapshot, and that we very explicitly said that it's impossible to make a guess or predict the outcome of the study overall based on this, but we felt like it was compelling information given the high profile nature of not only the disease, but this study and this drug. And so we felt like that warranted writing the story.
Yeah, and I mean, another point that I'd make is, as a journalist, you don't actually get to choose which of your stories get response. You try, but that's not always that's not really within our control. We put them out into the world and try to do the best job we can. So.
Right. Anybody has their hands up? We want to go.
Amy and Thomas still. So if anyone else wants to raise their hand, it was that Daryl Francis. So thank you for holding our thanks for holding our feet to the fire, Daryl. Do you know how prevalent the use of remdesivir treatment is outside of studies? It seems to be used a lot, but the main data we have are what Gilead said about how many compassionate use doses they've given, which I don't remember offhand, but it was a fairly big number. Probably not as big as hydroxychloroquine, which I'm under the impression that many, if not most, seriously hospitalized patients are actually getting that anecdotally.
So here's a question, Matt. How do we know that subjects weren't cherry picked?
We don't. I mean, except I don't think that, I think we can be fairly certain that I would be shocked if these were not the data that the doctors at the University of Chicago were seeing. I'd be shocked if they were taking a lot of data. In fact, they probably didn't have a reason to be doing that. I think they were trying to draw conclusions in real time. I don't think they were trying to move things one way or the other. What we really don't know is whether that's representative or not.
Right. I mean, the study has eligibility criteria that are established, that are supposed to be uniformly followed by all the participating hospitals, right? I mean, that's how clinical trials run, because you want to have a set of patients that are all within certain parameters to get you the best data. So we are assuming that the University of Chicago followed those parameters just like any other hospital will have followed those same parameters in terms of who will be eligible, who is not eligible from the study. That's we have to assume that because we don't have information about that.
When does the SEC start investigating the portfolios of the people who are on the meeting? I don't know.
Are the people on the meeting at the University of Chicago or
yeah, of the people who were on the meeting.
I mean, this was a standard meeting of, I'm sure these kinds of meetings happen at hospitals every day.
And another just recent question from Steve Quirito, maybe I missed it, is the video of the meeting publicly available? No, it's not publicly available. It was widely distributed as a recording on a mailing list. It is not accessible anymore, and it was never widely publicly available. It's not like it was on Reddit or something. Do we have, look, a bunch of raised hands.
Go.
Well, so I'm going to reiterate that we much prefer that you identify yourself on these. Let's try Nicholas.
Hi, Nicholas.
Hey, Nicholas. Are you there? You should be able to talk.
Oh, hello. Thank you for making this, podcast live chat. Question is, I mean,
can you tell us who you are first, Nicholas? I just want to establish practice.
Sure. Yeah, Nicholas Granatino out of London, worked for Endurance Ventures.
Great.
Venture.
That's great. Tell us your question.
Yeah. So in a positive, optimistic of continued expansion of the use of remdesivir, what is the capacity limitation of Gilead, and will that come and restrict the? I mean, the CEO talked about getting 1 million patients by the end of year. Is that going to be a bottleneck if the drug can expand in usage?
So I think, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what Gilead talked about was having 1 million doses available by the end of the year. Is that?
No, I think there was actually, I think it was bigger than that. We can look it up.
Somebody
it was 1 million. It was 1 million patients.
It was 1 million patients, not a
It
million.
was 1 million treatment.
There's 1 million doses now that are being donated.
Okay.
And promising by the end of the year there would be 1 million.
And to clarify for people,
I hope that's enough, especially when these are sick people.
Patients get. It's a daily infusion, so patients would get more than 1 dose of remdesivir, which is why dosing versus patients that can be treated is a different number.
Let's try CT Office as a guest. CT Office, you're on.
Hi, thanks so much, Adam. It's Michael Schwartz calling. I'm a subscriber.
Hey, Michael Schwartz,
Whoop, we lost him.
Oh, that's too bad.
Wait, hold on. I'm getting him. There you are. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Hi, what's the next step?
Next step. Right. It's a great question. It's super important, right? What is happening now? From what we understand, the severe study that we reported on last night is nearing completion. And we should, Gilead is expected to have results from that study by the end of the month, is what we understand, is what the company has said. I mean, it's not only what we understand, is what the company has disclosed. I don't know, and I asked Matt this offline before we started, whether then upsizing the study, adding more patients is going to change that. I don't think so, because as of last night, I think they actually even last night reiterated the fact that the severe study would have data out by the end of the month. So I think that's still happening. The other two studies that we talked about, the moderate COVID-19 study that Gilead is running, data will be expected in May. And I think also the NIH study, right, Matt?
Study also in May.
Both getting those in May.
And as always, I mean, a lot of these are endpoint-driven clinical trials, so the timing is always a guess.
Yeah.
It's not like we stop on this date, it's we stop when we have X amount of data.
But I think hopefully within the next 6 weeks, we should have a very clear, well, I don't want to say very clear, we should have a much clearer picture than we have today of what this drug is doing, if anything, for COVID-19 patients. I think that's super important given where we are today, all the discussion about opening up the economy again, getting us all out of our respective apartments and homes. It's an important time. So this all fits into a timeline of kind of the spring where at least we would know about one potentially promising drug.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for participating. What else we got, Matt? I'm going through the Q&A thing here.
Yeah, I don't see a new we've got comments about how it wouldn't be ethical to do placebo. It might not be ethical to do a placebo-controlled study, and how this shows us how much we need placebo. My buddy Ralph tells me vodka is greater than remdesivir. Yay or nay? I think that depends whether you have a viral infection and whether or not you're an alcoholic. Fundamentally, we have to wait for randomized controlled trials with a comparator arm. without remdesivir to be absolutely sure. Do you agree? I think we both agree with that on absolutely sure. I guess the question is going to be how sure we need to be with these drugs.
Yeah, I think, Matt, we've talked about this offline too, but maybe speculate a little bit. What happens, what do you think from a regulatory standpoint, what might happen before we get data from that NIH study that's randomized, placebo-controlled? I mean, there's been speculation. Scott Gottlieb has talked about this on Twitter and on his various TV appearances about, remdesivir, if there is some benefit seen in the severe study of an emergency use approval coming.
I mean, emergency use approvals don't have the same standard as approvals. So I wouldn't predict what the FDA is going to do, and they're obviously under a lot of pressure. It's also, I do believe that it's important to get randomized data. And look, I wish that we were set up with EHRs and with technology to get a lot of these trials started faster and done faster in these situations, but we're also going to have to make decisions based on the data that we have. So I think an EUA is certainly not off the table depending what these data show. And I think we all hate the uncertainty. And on that note, Kathleen Dorn asked, I joined late, did you also talk about the wonder drug, hydroxychloroquine? I mentioned it before. I think we have a lot of issues with those trials because they're small and they're conflicting. And those results could be due to chance. But it's also important to get data surfaced. George Matthew asked, is there any concern for access price to the drug over time? Many pharma models are now redesigned for specialty pharma model. Will this be a problem? Are there any safeguards from FDA or any other agency to prevent this? It's a great question, George. I think that the concerns about the drug are legitimate. I think Gilead has been telegraphing that this doesn't seem to be something they're looking to make a profit on, certainly in the short term. Adam? Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, we can only go on what Gilead has talked about, which has been that they don't intend this to be a commercial opportunity for them. This is something I would imagine that would be done at best sort of at cost. I know there's a lot of distrust, and you see that in various comments. You see it on Twitter about the motives of Gilead or other pharma companies in developing drugs for COVID-19 and whether they would seek to profit from them. I would personally, I find that hard to believe. I think that's probably not going to happen. Although at some point, there's going to have to be a discussion of like who pays for the manufacturing and all that stuff, and access will be part of that. So we'll have to see how that all looks, but that's kind of how I feel about it right now.
Kathleen Dorn wants everyone to know she put wonder drug in quotes, so she didn't mean wonder drug, she meant wonder drug. I saw an earlier question about synthetic controls and why can't they use previous patients' data as a control arm? Are their records that incomplete? It's really hard to use previous patients' data as a control arm. Hopefully there will be some analyses like that when we see the data, or even contemporaneous patients. But even taking patients and you take the first one, then the second one, then the next one, isn't as good as randomly determining which patient gets which treatment, because you end up with more confounding in the arms. I mean, this is one of the greatest medical breakthroughs of the 20th century, the discovery that you could do this and get information this way. It's just very hard not to have randomized data. Synthetic control arms, I mean, there's been a lot of progress and they can be better than nothing. It would be great to have some in this case. I haven't heard much about creating them yet.
I don't know, Matt, I think we've answered most of the questions and I don't see any more hand raised. So We've been on for about 45 minutes. I mean, if there's any other questions that people have, they want to throw them in here. If not, we can probably wrap this up.
So
Any others?
do we want to answer this question from El Cam about what Umar claims?
Sure. I don't see the question, but ask it. Go ahead.
Umar Rafat of Evercore ISI claims that no one in the severe trial at University of Chicago was on a ventilator. This is not your understanding, correct? I don't think we were on a call with Umar this morning, and I don't think we have that much of a difference of understanding. I think this isn't binary. At screening, they were not supposed to be on a ventilator. There is an arm that does include people on ventilators, which was started recently, so you'd think not many of these patients would be included, but we don't know. And patients could have been on ventilators if they were not on a ventilator at screening, but then they went on a ventilator. And then there are other things we don't know, and I think Umar and we would agree on a lot of those unknowns.
Yeah. Let's take a question from Kristen. Hey, Kristen, you're on. Hello.
Thank you. The question was raised by a couple of folks about comorbidities and striated populations, how African Americans are affected differentially, and are there comorbidities or risks that are known in the prior use of the compound?
So what was the question about that, Kristen?
So comorbidities, so risks that are known. So you don't have randomized trials. So in the absence of having a randomized trial, are there known comorbidity risks as there are known already for the chloroquine?
I mean, there are definitely known comorbidities for COVID-19.
No, for the treatment.
For the treatment. No, I think if you're asking about side effects of the drug, I don't think we really know. There's not that much. One of the differences from hydroxychloroquine is there are questions about hydroxychloroquine in this indication, but at least there's more than half a century of experience. This has only been used experimentally, and in very different populations than what we're talking about now.
I don't remember the NEJM paper that came out over the weekend, Matt, how much discussion there was of side effects, toxicity. Like, I don't
remember anyone making big deals of any particular toxicity like they have with QTC on hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, but Kristen, if you're interested in that, you might want to look up the New England Journal of Medicine paper that was published over the weekend, last weekend, on the compassionate use of remdesivir, and there may be some data or information in there that would be helpful to you.
Thank you.
We have one more raised hand from Jeff here. Jeff Roy.
Hi, I was curious. I joined late, so I might have missed this. Are you either from remdesivir or other agents? Are you getting any reporting on kind of IP and manufacturing issues globally? So kind of what's happening with players who would supply agents or prepare agents like this, prior to authorization, or even, just kind of what's the landscape looking like?
Not really beyond what Gilead said. It's a really good question. What happens to all the different sourcing? Right, Adam? Where Gilead said it's a global supply chain. We don't have a great mental picture of what.
Yeah, I mean, what Gilead has only spoken in very general terms about the supply chain or efforts to globalize manufacturing of this drug. So we don't really know all the particulars. It seems like there was an effort by the company to manufacture as much as they can and to bring in partners, including in other countries, to manufacture remdesivir, but specifics have not been disclosed. But that's going to be a big issue, right, Jeff? I mean, look, let's be optimistic and say that this drug is effective for people. There's going to be a huge demand for it, and so that makes manufacturing super important.
Yeah, I think we've covered it. I think we've gotten to a good number of these questions. I'm not seeing. Stan Shaw is here, so let's let Stan ask his question.
We'll finish with Stan.
Hey, Stan.
Oh, hi. It wasn't actually a question. I think the question about substratification of patients in terms of risk factors, if you're releasing data from one site in Chicago. I think there's been reports that Chicago is one of those cities where disproportionate, African American burden. And so you may be seeing response in a patient population enriched for certain comorbidities or other demographics that is not representative of the overall trial population. That's just my interpretation of her question.
Absolutely.
That's a good point. Thank you.
And I guess let's ask Ron a question. We'll let Ron go last, and then I think we're going to wrap up. Hi, Ron. Or let Ron ask us a question, rather. You there, Ron?
There you go. Hey, Ron. Sorry. Go ahead. No? I see his mute button on, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Okay. Ron, you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Right.
Has there been any collection of genomic data of the participants?
We don't know. I would assume so, but we don't know.
Okay.
And I think we can call it a wrap at this point.
Okay.
Unless there's CT office wants to ask a follow-up question. So sure.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Thanks again. You just mentioned something that none of these people were on ventilators, or you don't think they were on ventilators, or they might have, when they started, they were not on ventilators?
When they were screened, the enrollment criteria said that initially when they were screened, they were not on ventilators.
But wouldn't the people on the ventilators be like the most severe cases?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the debate people are having about severe. And I said this on Umer's call this morning, but there's this big debate on when to ventilate that's playing out partially geographically and partly between centers, that some doctors are waiting long for a lower SpO2 than they normally would to ventilate, on the idea that the COVID patients do okay and the ventilators may not be helping. There have been questions about when to ventilate. And
there's also is the hypothesis here where this drug will be more effective in earlier stages of the disease. That in other words, by the time that you unfortunately progress to the point where you need to be ventilated, it's too late.
It's too late.
They are focusing on patients who are not as ill as that.
Right. But I think defining the state of illness is going to be a big issue for all of these data, even in randomized trials, because COVID-19 there's such a range of how you can do with a positive COVID-19 test.
So this drug would be more treating somebody with early stages of
the
CD19?
The stage of the severe trial for Gilead is really about, you're taking people who are hospitalized and are very sick and trying to keep them from getting to that ventilator point. Like that would be the usage kind of imagined in this trial.
So if you look at in the severe study, if you look at what the primary endpoint, so the efficacy goal of the study is, it's using this essentially a numeric scale where you're looking at at the worst outcome obviously is death. The best outcome is being discharged from the hospital, and in between you're looking at essentially a gradation of clinical improvement, mostly looking at respiratory symptoms.
Right.
And that's kind of what you're doing. So, if you improve your score, I want to say your score goes down. I forget which direction they're going in, but that's kind of what they're looking at.
So the hope for the drug would be to use it sort of like you would use as like Tamiflu. When you started to come down with something, you would take this and hopefully it will.
Well, yes, with a very large caveat that remdesivir is a drug that's given intravenously. So Tamiflu is a pill. So this is not a pill. This is not a drug that you would be able to give. If you started feeling sick, you would be prescribed this.
Right.
This is a drug that will be given in the hospital.
Only in the hospital.
That's a big cap. That's a big difference.
There is a hope that it will rescue people who are much sicker than Tamiflu, and it's very hard to start a COVID-19 drug as one does with influenza, because influenza hits you like a truck and you know you're infected.
Right.
Whereas COVID-19 seems to creep up on people a lot.
Yeah.
They kind of have a cold and it gets worse and it gets worse, and then suddenly they're very sick. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
This is
Thank
very
you.
helpful.
Thanks everyone for joining the call today. I hope this was helpful to you, to a little bit more explanation, a little bit more background on what our story was yesterday. Again, appreciate your supporting STAT. If you're a STATS Plus subscriber.
Well, they all are.
You all are, so thank you very much. We appreciate that very much. And Matt, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, see you later, Adam.